The afternoon had been quiet, the kind that almost feels too still, when I heard footsteps behind me. Before I could turn, a familiar voice called my name. My heart skipped. It had been years since I'd heard that voice in person. I turned to see my uncle, smiling as if time hadn't touched him, though the faint lines on his face told stories of years I had missed. I froze for a moment, half in disbelief, before stepping forward to hug him. He'd been living abroad for as long as I could remember, visiting only in rare moments. The last time we met, I was still in school, and now here he was, unannounced, standing in my living room like no time had passed. I asked what brought him back, and he told me about a close family wedding happening in the coming days. But before I could ask more, I noticed he wasn't alone. Beside him stood a young woman, maybe my age, carrying a small suitcase. She greeted me politely, her voice calm yet tinged with a certain sadness, the kind you can't hide even behind a smile. My uncle introduced her as the daughter of an old friend, someone who had known our family for decades. She would be staying with us for a few days while attending the wedding. There was something about her eyes. They looked as though they carried too many unspoken words. She seemed pleasant enough, but I caught myself wondering what had brought her here, and why she seemed so guarded. My uncle chatted with the ease of someone comfortable in any situation, telling me stories about his travels, the people he'd met, and how much he'd missed home. I listened, grateful for the surprise visit, yet strangely aware of the quiet presence of the girl standing beside him. Later, as I helped prepare tea, I overheard her speaking softly to my uncle in the other room. I couldn't hear every word, but I sensed a gentle familiarity between them. Not romantic, more protective, as though he was looking out for her in some way. When I returned with the tray, she thanked me and offered a small smile. It didn't last long, but it felt genuine. We spent the rest of the evening exchanging light conversation. She spoke little, though when she did, there was a careful thoughtfulness to her words. My uncle mentioned that she had been through some difficult times recently but didn't go into detail. That small statement lingered in my mind long after. By nightfall, I realized something had shifted in the air. This was more than just a surprise family reunion. There was a quiet mystery about why they were here together, and I couldn't shake the feeling that this visit might change more than just my week. It might be the start of something I didn't see coming. Over the next few days, the house felt livelier than it had in months. My uncle spent most mornings visiting relatives and taking care of wedding arrangements, leaving me and her with time to talk. At first, our conversations were light, focused on small things, the weather, local food, how different life felt here compared to the city she came from. She seemed curious about the places I mentioned, so I offered to show her around. We walked through the old market streets, past stalls overflowing with colors and scents that felt like home to me. She paused often, taking in the details, asking about the history of certain places. Her eyes lit up when we reached the edge of the old bridge, where the river curved lazily under the afternoon sun. She told me she loved places like this, where life seemed to slow down. There was something in her tone, a longing for calm that felt deeper than the moment itself. One afternoon, while sipping tea, she shared a piece of her past. She had been engaged once, to someone her family thought was perfect for her. But the engagement ended abruptly, tangled in misunderstandings and harsh words that weren't hers to defend against. She didn't go into the painful details, but I could sense the wound had not fully healed. I found myself wanting to say something to comfort her, yet I also knew she wasn't looking for pity. She was simply stating a truth that shaped her. As days passed, our conversations began to flow more naturally. She told me about her love for sunsets, how the changing colors made her feel like the world could start fresh each evening. She spoke about music, her preference for soft melodies that told stories without words. She even admitted she had always dreamed of living near the sea, though she had never been. My uncle's presence in these moments was subtle but meaningful. He often looked at her with the quiet care of someone who wanted to see her stand on her own again. I began to notice how he seemed relieved when we got along, as if he was silently rooting for her to connect with someone who understood her. One evening, as we walked home from the market, she slowed her pace and glanced at the horizon. almost to herself she said, "Sometimes I wish I could start over somewhere new." There was no dramatic weight to it, just a soft truth carried by her voice. I didn't press her for more, but that sentence stayed with me long after. It wasn't just about a place. It felt like she was talking about a new chapter in life. And I realized, with a quiet certainty, that I wanted to be part of it. The wedding day arrived in a rush of colors, music, and hurried footsteps. The house was full of laughter and chatter, yet I noticed she was quieter than usual, her smile polite but fleeting. Guests came and went, and though she joined in the celebrations, there was a distance in her eyes, as if she were somewhere else entirely. I caught her slipping away to a quieter corner and found myself following without thinking. When I reached her, she was looking down at her hands, twisting a delicate bracelet around her wrist. She spoke before I could say anything, her voice low. She told me that in her last relationship, she had been accused of things she never did. Doubts had been planted by people who barely knew her, and her fiancé had chosen to believe them instead of her. She said it wasn't just the breakup that hurt, but the way trust could vanish so easily. She admitted she had stopped believing in promises after that. I listened without interrupting, feeling the weight of her words settle between us. In that moment, I told her about my own failed relationship, how it had left me questioning my worth. It wasn't about comparing wounds, but about letting her see she wasn't alone in the quiet ache of being misunderstood. She looked at me then, really looked, and for the first time I saw her guard lower just enough for the warmth to show through. Later that afternoon, my uncle found me near the garden and spoke in his usual calm way. He said, "Sometimes two people meet at the right time to fix each other." It was a simple sentence, but it stayed with me as the evening unfolded. I wondered if he could see something between us before we had even realized it ourselves. That night, as fireworks lit up the dark sky, we ended up standing side by side among the crowd. The bursts of color reflected in her eyes, and without thinking, our hands brushed. Neither of us moved away. It wasn't deliberate, yet it felt like a choice, one neither of us was ready to break. The noise of the celebration faded in my awareness, replaced by a quiet understanding that this was more than just a moment of comfort. When the last spark faded from the sky, we didn't speak about what had happened, but something had shifted. The distance between us felt smaller, and the silence between words felt less like absence and more like connection. I walked away knowing I didn't just want to see her smile again. I wanted to be the reason it stayed. Morning came with the soft light of departure. The suitcases were packed, the air in the house carrying that quiet heaviness that comes when goodbyes are near. She moved through the rooms slowly, as if committing every detail to memory. My uncle was already ready to leave, speaking cheerfully to others, but even his voice held a faint note of finality. I stood by the doorway, unsure how to put what I felt into words. When she approached, there was no forced smile, only an honesty in her expression that made the moment feel heavier than I'd expected. She told me she had decided to come back in a few weeks, not just for the town, but because she wanted to see where our connection might lead. She didn't use the word love, and I didn't either, but the meaning was clear enough. There was no grand promise, only the kind of quiet commitment that feels real because it isn't wrapped in theatrics. I told her I would be here, waiting, and that there was no need to rush anything. Her eyes softened, the guarded look replaced with something closer to trust. My uncle, who had been watching from a few steps away, gave a faint smile as if this was the ending he had hoped for all along. He placed a hand on my shoulder before turning to leave, saying only, "Life rarely gives second chances, don't waste this one." She stepped outside, the morning sun catching strands of her hair, and turned back for one last look before getting into the car. That single glance carried more than any long conversation could have, an unspoken agreement that this wasn't the end, only a pause. I watched the car pull away, the sound of the engine fading into the quiet street, but instead of the ache I'd expected, there was a steady warmth in my chest. I stood there for a while, letting the moment settle, realizing that for the first time in years, the future didn't feel like an empty stretch of time. It felt like something open, waiting to be shaped. I knew the days ahead would still have their uncertainties, but I also knew I wouldn't meet them alone in spirit. As I finally stepped back inside, I thought about how unexpected the past week had been. How a simple surprise visit had unfolded into something I hadn't even known I was looking for. Sometimes the people who enter our lives without warning leave the deepest marks, not because they change who we are, but because they remind us of who we can be when we let someone in. And in that quiet realization, I found hope I hadn't felt in years.